Did you see the news? There's a whole new Halo studio, and they're working on like 5 new games. Some of my favorite gaming memories are sitting on a couch at my friend's house playing Halo multiplayer on a big projector TV split screen. Based on many conversations I've had with folks around the industry, I'd be stunned if one of them wasn't an extraction mode game. With the popularity of the genre, it seems like everyone's chasing it, and it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot it has to offer. Well, that got me wondering, what would the design of a Halo extraction game look like? Well, let's design it together, shall we? We can cover the high-level design and then dig into some nitty-gritty about the combat, PvP, death, as well as explore some ideas on how to do something kind of brand new and bring the mode to a really broad market. Keep in mind, of course, this is really rough and quick, and I've no doubt you all have fantastic ideas as well. I'd love to hear them in the comments. It's right below the like button. One of the first steps to take when designing a game is to think through and establish some pillars. These are the fundamentals, the guiding principles that shape the decisions we make. It's important to start with these as they help to guide other elements of the design. For a Halo extraction game, the pillars I'd land on are capture the Halo universe. We have to do true service to the Halo franchise. It can't simply feel like a lipstick approach, in that it shouldn't feel like it's just a version of Tarkov that's skinned with Halo assets. The Halo universe needs to be a driving force behind decisions, both gameplay and creative. The game should just ooze the fantasy. It has to reward player investment and effort. Players should feel like they're rewarded for their investment and they're agents in the path of the future of the product. This is important as extraction games can risk feeling very punishing, so ensuring that player effort is rewarded is pretty critical. Halo's always been about contributing to something bigger than yourself, and this should really resonate here. This can impact seasonal outcomes or unlocking of weapons and progressions. Players should feel rewarded for the actions that they take in the game, both moment to moment and the meta. Not just like they're grinding out cosmetics, for the sake of it. It should also be accessible extraction. The Halo audience is one which is more accustomed to traditional deathmatch styles of game modes, where instant respawn is commonplace. It's necessary to keep this front of mind when designing the game, as without an audience, well, it's not much of a game, is it? The mode should make concessions in the traditional hardcore nature of extraction to be more accessible to the Halo audience. Though there needs to be a penalty for death, it should be mindful of the audience's expectations here. Along with these pillars, it's valuable to establish some baselines around the game to ensure that we've got the same mental picture and that we're on the same page. Let's say a standard game session length, like in a mission from deployment to extraction, would be around 15 to 30 minutes long, and we would expect most core players to play multiple missions in a single stretch. The target audience would likely play multiple sessions per week. We'd expect this to be a live service experience, and ideally would prefer for players to play in a squad, though we would support solo play, of course. Oh, and inspiration is also valuable. So good references here would be Helldivers 2 for how well it captures a fantasy, DMZ or the new Delta Force for how they bring extraction mode to a broad audience, and Witchfire for some of the ways it rewards engagement and its progression systems. Now let's dig into the core loop. In case you didn't know, the core loop is a game design tool. It describes what the player does session to session. For us, I think the core loop is actually pretty similar to other games like Helldivers. Players want to earn upgrades, and to do that, they need to collect items and rewards by completing missions. To do this, they select a location, which allows them to pick what kind of gameplay experience they want to do. Then they go in, kill enemies, collect loot, complete objectives, and hopefully successfully extract. Once they've extracted, they spend those items and rewards on upgrades, and then they repeat. Above all of this is the seasonal motivation, which, similar to say Tarkov, keeps players returning on a broader time frame. Almost like a meta core loop, I guess you could call it. One of the most critical moments in this core loop is actually how the players choose the location. Seems weird, right? Because it seems like a pretty dull moment, but how we design it has a huge impact on the rest of the game. The most obvious way is to have a series of static locations, similar to what Tarkov does, or even just one large map like DMZ. The upside to this is it can focus development efforts on specific locations, and especially when it comes to PvP, reduce queue times as players have reduced options, which ensures the matchmaking queues are less likely to get too long. They're just not fragmented. I'd push back against that though. In fact, I'd suggest that there's a way to lean into our pillars here by doing something similar to what Helldivers does with their broader galactic map and integrating PvP into it at specific fixed locations. Thematically, this would be presented as a dynamic, large-scale war across a solar system, or of course maybe a massive halo. Players can pick from locations on the map, and each one has a different enemy and objective associated with it. Importantly, these locations would change on a regular cadence, maybe weekly, providing players with a fresh set of choices. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but I think it would be really interesting to have some locations support PvP, and others only allow PvE. The PvE locations would be more mission-based, with specific objectives to accomplish at each location, like launching a missile or eliminating a Covenant threat, while the PvP locations would be more generic, allowing for the more natural flow of extraction PvPvE to play out. This combination is quite unique to the extraction space, but would probably work well to bridge the Halo audience to the new game mode. The whole goal of this location selection system is to provide players with agency over the kind of experience that they want to engage in. Think about it much like a simpler form of the Destiny 2 model, where players have objectives that they need to complete each week to earn currency to unlock rewards. In addition to this, the location choice and the player's effort would have some amount of impact on the more global war effort. This is shown to be really positive in Helldivers, with players feeling like they have a meaningful impact. This seems like an ancillary design element, and I suppose it is. You could simply do this manually or as an afterthought, but I believe that integrating the community and their actions into guiding the outcome of some larger narrative creates deeper bonds with players. It just makes them care a bit more.
That's right, you mothers! Run!
Not if we can help it, Sergeant.
Once players have selected the location, they're then thrust into the mission proper, and the moment-to-moment gameplay kicks off. The critical component here, of course, is the movement and the combat. Though not simple to execute on, it's in some ways the easiest to design, as there's already a really strong existing combat model to follow. End of the day, this has to play and feel like Halo. Time to kill, movement across the map being fluid, shields which recharge, gun choices between ammunition-based and energy-based, they should all follow the traditional Halo formula. A component which would be a shift, but something I definitely integrate, is a limited inventory system. A fundamental gameplay element of extraction games is collecting perishable loot, and we've seen a few ways to accomplish this. Tarkov, of course, has a high complexity inventory system, which I'd shy away from. It just doesn't align with this audience's expectations. But Helldivers gets too simple with its just a collectible currency. I'd likely aim somewhere in the middle, say similar to DMZ. What I'd be going for is a system which creates opportunities for players to make interesting decisions with regards to the loot they're carrying, while limiting the amount of time needed to invest on that decision making while in the mission. Like I said, DMZ is a pretty good example here, where players have limited slots to fill and a small number of items with which to fill them. There's no bagception like you get in Tarkov. Death is also a shift, as most players in Halo games have been used to more traditional deathmatch style modes, or slight variations of that, where respawn is functionally instant. Again, move away from that, allowing players to have some form of self or group reviving mechanic which is generous, but not as generous as, say, Helldivers 2. It makes sense in Helldivers to have a shared resurrection pool, which can be used to bring in respawns, and for it to be so generous, especially given the nature of the friendly fire and the way that missions are designed. For our game, I'd lean more into, again, how DMZ approaches it, but rather than being the consumables which need to be found and they take up inventory slots, probably treat it more like lives that get consumed, and each player has a certain number that can be used during a session. And of course, it wouldn't be an extraction game without an extraction mechanic. The more these extraction mechanics can make sense and feel like they're part of the fantasy, the easier it is for the broader audience to understand. And we want to ensure we are oozing our fantasy, don't forget. Fortunately for us, we have the Pelicans, which can easily be leveraged to act as an extraction after a time delay.
Killing spree. Double kill.
One of the key components to the extraction loop is the meta upgrading. By meta, we usually are referring to something that happens outside of the core moment-to-moment gameplay. In this case, outside of the missions where you're engaging in a lot of combat. In Tarkov, this is the hideout. In Witchfire, it's the Hermitorium. In Helldivers, it's the Super Destroyers. Aligning with our first pillar, we would want this to be a location which fits thematically with Halo, and a frigate of some sort seems to make the most sense. A ship which you can walk around in, make your own with customizations and visible upgrades. These systems would be used to unlock all of the power and customization progressions for the players, and players would use items and currency that they collect while in the mission in order to upgrade it. As I mentioned when discussing loot, I think it's helpful to have items that can be found in raid, like a piece of technology or hardware, that players need to extract in order to perform certain upgrades. This gives players really clear and identifiable secondary or layered goals to aim for when in mission. It can also add depth to finding those items. A really compelling and tension-building moment is when you find an item you've been looking for some time, only to realize you still have to extract with it. It's a unique gameplay element of extraction and definitely a valuable thing to capture. One of the dominant challenges that extraction games, or really any games with linear power progression in a live service environment face, is how to reset the player progression. Inevitably, players end up in a situation where they are at the top end of the power progression and they've unlocked everything. What do they do then? Developers can either continue to add content and progression to the end game, which results in what's referred to as a content treadmill, and very expensive, or they can do a full power reset. Tarkov calls it a wipe, where everyone's character is deleted and they need to make a new one, restarting the path from zero to hero all over again. I think this wipe system kind of generally works, but feels like a shallow implementation of the solution. I'd probably look to games like Path of Exile and how they've structured their seasonal content. By having each season focus on introducing a new gameplay mechanic, every season feels like a fresh addition to the game, and there's an overriding, valuable reason for the reset to occur. It should always feel like joining a new season and starting over is a good thing. For us, I'd chase a similar idea. It could be the introduction of a new enemy type, such as the Flood, a new environment type, or it could be a more systemic thing, such as an overriding negative effect that needs to be solved on every map. Regardless, this would give a theme to every seasonal wipe, and should feel like you're resetting your character. It should feel like a bonus instead of a chore. Ideally, these resets and the seasons also tie into the bigger narrative that the players are driving as part of that larger war effort, which is affected by the players' actions throughout the seasons. As with all game ideas, there are risks that are worth highlighting. Some that come with this concept are general scope, and I'd want to look at tech or deployment solutions to mitigate that risk. That said, it's Halo, not an indie game, and there's an audience expectation of scale with a project and IP like this. Speaking of expectation, there's also a risk of the audience not understanding the concept and taking some time to appreciate it. They've generally been exposed to much simpler game systems and modes, and this has a bit of added complexity to it with the progression systems. I do have confidence that with mindful development practices and strong community management, both of these could be mitigated.
Now, show me what you can do.
Look, if I was kicking off the project, I'd aim to keep the team quite small, focused in on the moment-to-moment gameplay, and then using placeholder prototypes as much as possible to test out the inventory, death, extraction, and upgrading loop. The intention would be to stay quite small for a long time until we felt very confident we had addressed risks and had an experience that showcased to the team what it is we wanted to build before scaling up. So that's a general summary of the idea. I'm sure I've missed some concepts or haven't dug into enough detail on something, and I've no doubt you disagree with parts of my assertions, which is really good. I'd love to hear what you do or don't like, what you would do differently. That's the whole benefit of early designs like this, to beat them up and refine them. Let me know down in the comments what you think and what you would change. And if you are making an extraction game, I have another video where I get into way more detail on how to design a game like Escape from Tarkov. You can check it out right here. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.